I wrote a paper attempting to analyze the reasons why people with disabilities reject the identity and if the reasons were outside my own personal reasons for initially rejecting the identity. I did this initially with the intention of using identity politics theory and social identity theory. I primarily ended up using identity politics because the more I looked into the reasons that had been researched, I found more perspectives related to the established structure of identity label relationships. The majority of data came from secondary interviews, which I found incredibly vague in most cases. Many of the researchers used terms like the majority, most, or some participants gave reasoning related to blank when asked blank. I wish I had utilized more online platforms to potentially get firsthand data. Disability as a whole is not something easily defined, and I personally didn't want to define it too much for my paper because I wanted to avoid the hierarchy of disabilities, which I didn't even address because I wanted to ignore the societal idea that certain groups and capabilities in the disabled community were more deserving than others. Disabled person isn't necessarily a derogatory term, but it is treated like it is. It is simply a personal identification preference. However, due to the previous nature of the term, many feel that as though it facilitates how society regards persons with disabilities as less endowed and tends to magnify a single difference to cover up a multitude of similarities as the order of the day in community living settings. Societal references to persons with disabilities are along the lines of the less privileged members of our society or the disabled members of our society that has created a sense of tension around the phrase for some in the community. A downward social status accompanying the loss of ability or to be independent, engage in paid work, and or be considered attractive or desirable have been found to be the most consistent experience of persons with disability. In my research, there were a number of diverse, very personal reasons for a standalone identity that can take shape in several different ways, though the reason not to was more than once attributed to society's want to only appreciate a sound and perfect body, physical attractiveness, interdependence, and achievement. It then ascribes disability to signify ugliness, tragedy, asexuality, invalidity, and frailty. This makes a descriptor related to an individual's disability disempowering when ascribed by a societal member, in contrast to a person actively choosing the identity as a disabled person. When the simple claim of identity, disabled person, or person with disability, individuals are combating stereotypes, prejudices, and harmful practices relating to the identity. Claiming this identity when one is able facilitates change to the rights of persons with disability and contributes to the formation of group support, both within and outside of the community of disabled culture. I do think my paper completed what I wanted with the available information, which does partially mean the stuff that doesn't cost money. I accomplished what the Capstone wanted of me and what I wanted of it. As far as myself, I definitely affected by a huge amount of societal influence of the disabled identity. I do identify as a disabled person, even though my severity of issues are more episodic, but it is something I have to consciously think about every single day and take into consideration in anything I want to do. My personal acceptance is probably influenced by the fact that I am surrounded by many other persons with disabilities in my family and in my friend group. I've even lost two very important people to me because of the complications with their disabilities. After my initial diagnosis, and those instances were probably the times I struggled most because of the implication of my disability for the people that I love. But I ultimately believe that being proud and allowing myself to feel accomplishment when I do things that aren't hard for able-bodied people but are hard for me because I'm not able-bodied has made a difference in my sense of self. I don't view myself as a lazy person. I view myself as someone who takes her body into account and most of the time accepts the need to rest. Most of the time. I also think that publicly identifying as a disabled person or person with a disability helps influence members of society who come across me, widen their perspective of disability. Writing down my project felt like a big journal entry or like one of those class assignments where they have you write something about yourself and you write something absentmindedly, read it back, and you're like, that is something about myself that I hadn't actually actively considered before. So it was both troubling but also incredibly therapeutic. coming face to face with my own relationships with my active disabled identity and seeing it that it wasn't a solo experience.